Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. Scrambling behind the scenes here this morning. Many of you know this. We're pre-recording portions of our video broadcast just to kind of deliver it to you in the method that we've grown accustomed. Obviously, you've been aware of some of the things we've dealt with, and some of this we pre-recorded yesterday afternoon on Tuesday, and at the time, it seemed like Jayden Maiava, the quarterback from UNLV, on his way to UGA. Now, that is not the case. So we have good interviews today, but some of what we had planned on doing has been taken out of the broadcast. Mike Griffith stops by later on. Jake Fromm stops by later on. So the portion where Mike and I talked about Maiava, we took that out because it just seemed a little bit dated. In the case of Jake Fromm, we sort of talked about this more from the broad, big picture perspective of if you're a quarterback already on the roster, what does it mean that Georgia might be in pursuit of another quarterback, and that still seems relevant enough that it's worth that discussion, so keep that in mind here today. We'll begin today by talking about the Maiava news, the twist and turn that it takes, and we are also going to look at Georgia's status as a kind of perennial preseason number one, at least based on the way two early top 25s. And over the course of the next couple of days, we're going to address some of the issues standing in Georgia's way if it is to be able to do that. So what do you say we have some fun today? Fully loaded show on a Wednesday. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Never a dull moment around here. That is obviously true here once again. I'm always amazed around Georgia football, some of the stuff that becomes like a 3-day story that ultimately ends up never mattering at all, and I believe we may have an example of this. We're now on day 3 of talking about Jayden Maiava, the quarterback from UNLV, and it certainly seems like that discussion will result in a player who, at least based on how we understand things as of right now, is actually not going to end up at UGA after a couple of days of thinking that he might do that. If you're just sort of waking up here on a Wednesday, or if you've been, perhaps busy and in meetings and things like that, let me give you the latest on this. A lot of reports out there. The first one I saw very early here on this Wednesday morning came from Greg Biggins, 24/7 Sports. I'll show you this. I don't think he necessarily broke the story. He just happened to be the guy that I saw have it first on 3 ESPN. Pretty much everybody reporting this now. Biggins writing on Twitter, in one of the more whirlwind recruitments I can remember, I'm now hearing that former UNLV quarterback Jayden Maiava has flipped his commitment from Georgia to USC. This one has gone back and forth 2 or 3 times, so this one might not be done until he starts classes. So bottom line is, On 3's had it, 24/7's had it, ESPN's had it. It seems like Jayden Maiava at one point in time choosing Georgia over USC has apparently rethought that decision, and now looks like he may be going to USC instead of Georgia. So over the course of the next day, perhaps the next week, we're going to recount the top moments of the Jayden Maiava era there at Georgia. A lot of folks have great memories of the Maiava tenure here. One of the great debates we have sometimes is who earns DGD status. I don't quite know that Maiava earned a DGD status in his roughly 5 minutes of being connected to the Georgia program, but this is one of those crazy things that's out there. Now, let me recount what we have said about this, because honestly, I think everything we did say has actually kind of held up pretty well in light of the idea that Maiava is moving on, or perhaps never even coming here to begin with, and just going to go out to USC. Let me recount what has been said about this as a reminder, and then I want to give you, I think, a pretty important takeaway about this kind of stuff moving forward, something we've also probably said before. So we have said multiple times since the Maiava news occurred that I probably still favored Gunnar Stockton to be the backup quarterback for Georgia next season. Who knows if I would have turned out to be right about that. But I believe I know enough about Stockton to believe that he is well-positioned to at some point in time perhaps be a starting quarterback at Georgia, and perhaps well-positioned to be in a valuable spot next year, which is the backup to Carson Beck, learning as his understudy, getting a chance to play in a traditional backup role. And if something bad were to happen, Beck were to get injured, I would believe that Stockton would have first crack to be the guy that goes out and gets a chance to start. Now, we said that even when Maiava was apparently coming here, and I don't obviously see any reason to change our mind on that now. even if Georgia goes out and gets another quarterback. In other words, Maiava had pretty good numbers at UNLV. We discussed this yesterday. Better than, in some respects, some of the more high-profile transfers who are going to more high-profile locations to perhaps be starter. The Maiava numbers kind of compared pretty favorably to some of those guys, but that was never enough for us to say, therefore, he's the number 2 quarterback, and when Carson Beck leaves, he might go on to be the starting quarterback. We just never really quite got there on all of that. We still like Gunnar Stockton a lot, and the fact that Maiava has sort of rethought his decision with Georgia, perhaps that validates that opinion even more so, that Georgia might actually be in pretty good hands with a backup quarterback overall. I believe that Georgia would still like to get a veteran quarterback, perhaps with some starting experience, but apparently that's not going to be Maiava, who kind of rethinks all this and ends up going in the direction of apparently USC, and we'll see if that ends up being a done deal or not. But that's sort of where that stands here right now. A very strange story indeed. But I think the strangeness of this story sort of reinforces something we've been saying here for a while, is that college football has become a very much a short-term proposition story. That college football has become a very much win-now story. The old thing that Kirby Smart used to do, the phrase that he somewhat made famous, the idea of WIN as an acronym, what's important now. In college football, that is probably more true now than it ever was. And I think if you're looking for the lens from which to kind of view this Jayden Maiava story, a guy who was coming here in all likelihood wouldn't play very much in 2024, and if you're not playing very much in 2024, do you even stay for 2025, and are you willing to be that patient, kind of wait in the wings and wait your turn and compete to even be a backup, and then after that, perhaps compete to be a starting quarterback? For a lot of players in this day and age of transfer portal, and we think soon to be kind of unlimited transfers where you're not bound by the one-time transfer decision anymore, for a guy like Maiava who has 3 years of eligibility, that perhaps was just a wait that, having a chance to rethink this, that maybe he wasn't sure he wanted to go through. And so therefore, a guy who's more of a long-term proposition for Georgia ends up not being a proposition at all. And if you're a fan, I think that's the important takeaway on all this right now, that players that can't help you right away probably should not be viewed as important now as they would have been in the past. And that kind of comes across a little bit cold, a little bit callous, whatever. I don't mean for it to necessarily be that way, but we see this for players that Georgia signs. They come in, they're here for a bit, and then they're gone because it just didn't quite materialize for them fast enough at Georgia, so they moved on. You can't necessarily feel sort of ill will towards the players for doing that. They're simply leveraging the system that's in place here right now. But in terms of who we prioritize and in terms of who we spend a lot of time talking about, that conversation has got to be spent around the guys who can help you right now. That college football is not quite the long-term proposition sport that it would have been in the past. And in the past, smart coaches were the coaches that were building for the future and laying the groundwork for what can help you 2, 3, perhaps even 4 years from now. I'm not quite so sure that luxury exists around college football anymore. That Jayden Maiava was the kind of guy that coming into UGA was only going to matter to this program perhaps 2 years from now, and that's simply just too long into the future to have any actual tangible value here at this moment. And ultimately, the decision to kind of commit to Georgia, then perhaps based on these reports, flip that decision away from Georgia, just sort of shows you here that anybody that's sort of a part of your long-range plans may not actually be a part of your plans there at all. So Maiava comes in, apparently going out, and the actual story for Georgia on the field in 2024 remains unchanged. This has become a time in which staying focused on the guys who can help you in the moment probably matters more than anything else. All right, let me kind of shift gears here to something else for a moment. Speaking of sort of new eras and new ages in college football, something that probably I think is the kind of thing we may have to get used to in the future. And I joked about this a moment ago about whether or not Jayden Maiava earned DGD status in his roughly 5 minutes of being committed to the Georgia program. But on a more serious note, a guy in the past that we have said should be considered a DGD and someone that we do believe should have kind of a valuable place in the Georgia football story, sees his college career now come to an end. I'll show you this on the screen. A.D. Mitchell writing a very touching, heartfelt letter in the Players Tribune. Some of you have kind of shared this to me. And, obviously Mitchell reflects on being a father. He's got a daughter here. But in the midst of thanking the folks at Texas for his time there, he also writes this. He says, "And to all my Bulldog fans, my amazing coaches, my brothers in the field, the legendary 2021 class, we did that. We made history together. I love all of y'all." And to me, this sort of reflects a very modern college football story. A guy who, upon leaving to move on to the NFL draft, and by the way, we think that Mitchell can be a terrific NFL wide receiver, but a guy in moving on to the next phase of his football life thanks a couple of different schools. He thanks his current school and he thanks his former school. And I do believe that Georgia fans need to have some room for this category. A guy who did not play the entirety of his college career at Georgia, but my gosh, did he make Georgia better while he was here? You better believe that he did. And if you want to have the more serious conversation with the true definition of the idea of a DGD, damn good dog, if you want to have a true definition of what that actually is, to me, that's always been the simplest explanation, the simplest definition, and the easiest to understand. Did you work to leave Georgia better than you found it? While you were here, while you were a part of the Georgia program, did you work to put this program on a higher footing when you left it than it was when you got here? In the case of A.D. Mitchell, if you're watching on video, big catch against Alabama, the national championship game. Big catch against Ohio State. A guy who just had a penchant for doing big things in big games. Clearly, A.D. Mitchell did that. So for all of us who are, kind of in college football in this day and age, we're all having to try to make sense of what's new about this sport. Players coming and going. Some of them coming and going before you ever get a chance to actually meet them. Some, though, sticking around long enough to make a major contribution. Not the only school they made a contribution to, but no less a gigantic contribution made to Georgia when A.D. Mitchell was here, participating in a couple of national championship teams. So he thanks Georgia on his way to the NFL, and I believe that Georgia fans would do right to wish Mitchell well as he moves on to the league as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Normally, I say live on video. We are some version of live today, live for our comments, our First and 15 there at DawgNation.com, which starts at 9:45, and our R.S. Andrews cool down when the show is done. We're live for all of that, but kind of pre-recorded for what we think of as the sort of normal portion of the show. We're doing that as a way of really kind of being able to ensure we deliver the show in the way that you've come to expect it. So having a good time doing that with you here today. By the way, a couple of notes on all of that here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let me remind you that we're brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. Now, I love this because that gives you the chance, me the chance, to have the prestige of knowing that the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics is also serving us as well for our termite protection, for our pest control, bugs, critters, things like that. Breda Pest Management keeping all of that away from you and outside your house, which is a really, really good thing. And in addition to that, not only can you brag to your friends and say, hey, the same pest control company that takes care of Sanford Stadium is taking care of my home, but in addition to that, the prestige that has been earned by Breda Pest Management for all these years, in business since 1975, 125 employees stretch all across our market area, taking good care of folks on a daily basis. That strength as an organization can be leveraged for your benefit there too, because when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, for your pest control, you're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. And that's a really good thing right now. We're all looking for ways to save money where possible, to put more money back into our pocket when we can. Breda Pest Management can help you do that. You may have gotten that letter in the mail that your cost of service is going up with your current termite company. That's not going to be the case at Breda Pest Management. They're going to take good care of you, and they're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch. So do it today. Reach out to them online. BredaPest.com. That's the website. BREDA. BredaPest.com for more on that. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics, and a really good friend of ours here on DawgNation Daily as well. All right, couple of programming notes, and then we're going to get on with the rest of the discussion here, including looking at a very fun topic around Georgia here coming up in a couple of seconds. But so many of you know this. We are pre-recording portions of this here right now. We talked about that a little bit a moment ago. A couple of things we pre-recorded yesterday, and we did so in light of the thought at the time that Jayden Maiava, who had committed to Georgia, was actually coming to UGA. And so a couple of things today. We're going to have Mike Griffith on in a moment. The portion where Mike and I talked about Maiava, we just simply took out. So the Mike interview is going to seem really short. Part of that's because we just spent some time talking about Maiava at the end, and that just seemed really, really dated, and so we yanked that out. Also today, we have former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm on the show. We talked to Jake about some very interesting stuff as it relates to being a part of an NFL franchise that sees a head coach get fired, the fact that Jake was actually put active on the active roster for the final 2 games of the year. So that's kind of a nice thing for Jake. So we'll talk about some of Jake's actual football career, which is really interesting. And the portion where we talked about the Maiava news there, I'm going to leave in because the actual angle we approach that from is, hey, if you're one of the quarterbacks on the roster, like a Puglisi or a Stockton, the idea that another quarterback could come in and be competing with you still seems relevant, even though it perhaps won't be Maiava. So we'll leave that in with Jake Fromm coming up here in just a little bit. Now, with all of that said, let's now get ready to go around the doghouse and have what I think is kind of an interesting and fun conversation, because I always love this portion of the year when we turn the page to the new year. Even when Georgia's the reigning national champion, there's just something really fun and kind of exhilarating to me about the sort of 365-day college football calendar and the fact that there's always a new year to get excited for and always a new year to get ready for. And I would say that that's probably more true in a year like 2024 because Georgia obviously, had to deal with the indignity of not winning a national championship here during the 2023 season and very eager to do something about that for 2024. And one of the things that you see right now is that in some of the kind of way too early top 25s, ESPN's had one, a lot of the major outlets have had one, and I don't believe I've seen any of them thus far, and perhaps you have, and maybe you could show it to me if you have, but I don't believe I've seen any of them thus far that have not had Georgia as the number 1 team in these way too early top 25s here thus far. So, we didn't need that, for those of us who are Georgia fans, to tell us that Georgia was going to be a major contender for the upcoming season. But it does just sort of confirm that even more, that right now Georgia's sort of standing on top of the world in terms of these way too early top 25s. So later on the show, we're going to kind of get more into detail about exactly where other teams are ranked and kind of what Georgia's perhaps top competition for a national championship next season is. But also, I want to do something over the next series of days here a little bit. I want to look at least 3. We may end up doing more than that, but I want to look at least 3 issues sort of perhaps standing in Georgia's way, questions maybe that need to be answered, as Georgia tries to kind of get back on the national championship horse and reign on top of the sport here at the end of the 2024 season, where it's going to be a very new look and quite different season for the sport overall. So Georgia right now kind of thought as the unofficial preseason number 1 to begin 2024, but what are the challenges awaiting UGA as it gets ready to do all of that? I think first and foremost, primarily, when you think about what would be the thing that would perhaps be a stumbling block for Georgia that would perhaps prevent this championship success from occurring, I think first and foremost, one of the things you look at is the schedule overall. That while right now no one has a better roster in place than Georgia than Georgia does, this is also probably to begin a season as tough a schedule as I can ever remember Georgia having. In fact, let me give you a reminder of this if you're watching on video. Not the prettiest graphic, I'll admit that. But nonetheless, by the way, I made that. I'm criticizing myself. But when you look at the overall schedule, you see how challenging it is. How about a neutral site non-conference game against Clemson to begin the year? How about a new-look Kentucky team with Brock Vandagriff on September 14th? How about road games, September 28th at Alabama, at Texas October 19th, a very highly ranked Ole Miss team November 9th, plus the, at least for now, traditional rivals like Auburn, Florida, Tennessee, all in the mix there as well. This is an incredibly tough schedule for Georgia. Now, the good news about this is that we know that Georgia is not going to shy away from tough competition. In fact, we believe this is the kind of thing that Georgia's been bracing for quite some time, because before the expanded SEC and before all these changes, Georgia was already adding a lot of big-time non-conference matchups like the one against Clemson. In future years, Georgia was supposed to play like multiple Power 5 non-conference big-time games. So beefing up schedules is something that Georgia's been planning to do for quite some time. In fact, if you want to go back couple of summers ago, Kirby Smart talked about that whether the SEC, adds more SEC games or you play better tough non-conference games, that Kirby's belief is that Georgia should be and will be playing very tough games moving forward. So Georgia's not afraid of this schedule. Kirby Smart's words from the past to tell us how true that is. In fact, let's go back and hear him from a couple of summers ago on that very point.
We've been very aggressive in terms of scheduling and trying to schedule opponents out in the future that make great matchups, because I want the University of Georgia to play in big games. So whether that's an extra SEC game or another Power 5 opponent that attracts our fan base and excites our fan base, then so be it.
So I think that's the exact mindset you want to have, not being afraid of, not shying away from playing these type of games. And for the Georgia fan who says, yeah, but still, you can't go undefeated playing that schedule, I don't believe. If that's the way that you believe, I think you're probably right. I've said before that no one, typically speaking, is probably more optimistic about Georgia on a sort of yearly basis than I am. But at the same time, even I would look at that and say, I don't know that you can expect to go on the road and have a clean sweep of Texas, Bama, and Ole Miss. You might be doing well to win 2 of those 3 games. And, you might take 11-1 right now and run with it as a guaranteed spot in the college football playoff for next year. You might even be okay with, say, 10-2. That might be quite enough. But the other thing to keep in mind is while Georgia's dealing with all of this, most of the other championship contending teams find themselves in a somewhat similar situation. In fact, let me give you a quick comparison here for a moment. So the reigning national champs for now is Michigan. We think about Georgia having to play Clemson, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss. But next year, Michigan's schedule has a non-conference game against Texas, a game against the new Big Ten team USC, a game against Washington on October 5th. That's the team they played for the national championship. They've got Oregon on the schedule next year, and they finish against Ohio State. So for the most part, when it comes to the 2 leagues that are going to be putting more teams in the college football playoff than others, it's not it's not just Georgia that's playing a much tougher schedule. It's really the entirety of the best teams in the Big Ten and the SEC both that'll be playing much tougher schedules. And that matters as we start to think about what the new year's going to look like. We all have to recalibrate our expectations. In the past, the idea of a great season for Georgia was you better win them all. You better be 12-0 and leave the committee no room for doubt, no room for error in terms of excluding you from the playoff. But moving forward, I don't know when the next time we'll have an undefeated college football playoff national champion is, but I don't believe it'll be next year. And perhaps it might not be many years in the future, and it may never happen again. All of the best teams are about to play tougher schedules, Georgia included. So when you think about Georgia's pursuit of a national championship in 2024, one of the potential things standing in the way is a schedule on paper perhaps tougher than any that Georgia's ever played. But that's the new normal for college football. And as Georgia navigates that, the rest of the top teams in college football, they will also be navigating similar circumstances. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. So, as we told you, busy show for us. It's Jake Fromm before we're done. Really good stuff with Jake on the quarterback situation at Georgia and his own career and the national championship game and everything else in between. But for now, on everything else as it relates to Georgia football, including the aftermath of the college football playoff, Georgia's presence as a way too early top 25 number 1 team, kind of unofficial status, but still fun to talk about. We'll cover all of that ground in and more as we welcome in Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, always a nice pleasure to have Mike Griffith on the program, especially when Mike's kind enough to kind of work with our schedule a little bit here this week. National Championship over, 2024 upon us. And one of my favorite times of the year, Mike, when we start seeing some of these way too early top 25s starting to come out, the unofficial rankings. And pretty consistently here, we're seeing Georgia at the top of those. What do you make of the fact there's already such high expectations for Georgia for this upcoming season?
Well, I think it's out of respect for the culture that Kirby Smart has built. That was on display in the Orange Bowl with all the guys that opted in. There's an opt-in culture at Georgia. I mean, that's accountability and I just got to tell you, though, Brandon, when I think about this 29-game win streak and what Georgia accomplished, and I know it's still fresh in our minds, but this is going to stand the test of time, man. And I think about why Georgia wasn't in the playoff. I think about how they limped into the SEC title game. Let's reflect on the November schedule. A Missouri team that beat Ohio State, an Ole Miss team that beat Penn State, a Tennessee team that beat Iowa 35-0, and even Georgia Tech was impressive in their bowl win. And that was a murderer's row. And where my head goes with this is next year's schedule. Yeah, we've got Georgia picked number one preseason, but boy, they've got a tough schedule. And I don't want to hear any more from people saying that the SEC needs a 9-game schedule, Brandon. I just don't think they can do that because of the attrition and the physicality of the league. That those Michigan and Washington teams that we saw Monday night, they didn't have to go through that gauntlet. So my mind turns to the schedule and how realistic it is for any SEC team to emerge unscathed enough to win a 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I sort of think the day and age of the undefeated national champion is probably over. Obviously, the best SEC teams for the most part are going to be playing tougher schedules year to year. I think that Michigan, with the addition of Washington and Oregon, you look at their 2024 schedule, looks pretty tough right now too. Ohio State's maybe not quite as tough as you might think, but I just think for the very best teams who sort of expect to be perennial playoff contenders, I think they're all, for the most part, especially the SEC teams, playing more tough, more difficult schedules. And so therefore, 11-1 regular season, 10-2 regular season, and having that produce an eventual national championship, kind of like it works out in the NFL oftentimes. I just think, Mike, that's probably what the future of college football is.
I think you're right. And listen, I don't want to take anything away from Georgia's place in the preseason polls. The reality is the preseason poll doesn't mean what it used to, because it's not a race to number one in the poll any longer. It's a race to the playoff. And really, if you're anywhere in the top 25, there's a pretty good chance you've got a chance at qualifying. I do want to throw this tease out there, though, as I put this Georgia program into perspective. Brandon, this is going to shock you. I don't think I shock you very often with Georgia facts. I think you're quite the student of the game, especially when it comes to Georgia football history. I know I've told you before that Vince Dooley was never ranked in the preseason top 5 of any poll. I know I've told you that. But even more surprising, when I went back and compared this Georgia 3-year run that we just witnessed, I didn't realize that Herschel Walker never beat a top 5 ranked team. That Notre Dame team that Georgia beat in the national championship game was number 7. I did a double take. And this Georgia team over the last 3 years that we've been watching, Brandon, they beat 7 top 5 teams. We have witnessed some incredible football under Kirby Smart.
No doubt about that. What'd you think of the national championship game on Monday, Mike?
Frustrated. Felt like we deserved better. I don't know who's seen the new Hunger Games movie, but the first 2 hours were pretty good. I wanted the last 38 minutes back. I felt like I deserved a better ending. I felt like I deserved a better fourth quarter. I was very disappointed with the officiating. I thought the game changed on 2 calls, notably called differently. Washington was driving and had a 35-yard completion into Michigan territory, and there was a really ticky-tack holding call. They were down 20-13. It was a momentum-changing play, and they called the ticky-tack hold and brought it back, and they punted away. And then on the next play, the next possession, Michigan with a flagrant hold that didn't get called and a 41-yard gain that led to the touchdown that essentially finished the game. I thought it was terrible officiating. I thought it was probably the strongest evidence of officiating defining a game probably since the Ohio State-Miami game back in 2003 in the national title game. Very disappointed with the ACC officials. I thought the game was called pretty loose throughout, but I don't like it. It's like a strike zone, Brandon. I just want consistency, and we didn't get that last night, and that was too bad.
Mike, appreciate your time on the program today. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com, and, of course, back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management very soon, too.
Got it.
Hey, Mike, thanks very much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Appreciate Mike Griffith being on the show, and a reminder if you're just joining us. So we recorded the Mike interview yesterday. We're pre-recording portions of the show. You've heard me say that. And the part we get into, like the Jayden Maiava thing, we had to take that part out because, as you know, as we talked about off the top of our program today, that news is taking quite a twist here as of late. So we took that out. There is a portion of that we're leaving into the discussion we're about to have with Jake Fromm coming up in a moment. And we're keeping that in there just simply because it's more broadly about, quarterback competitions and the idea that Georgia wants that fourth quarterback and how Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi perhaps feel or respond to that. So that to me still seems relevant enough that we'll keep that in here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And let's get you ready for the Dog Nation cruise coming up in April, leaving on board Allure of the Seas. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind about this. Allure of the Seas, one of the largest cruise ships at sea. It's a part of the Oasis class of ships. And this is the first time here in 2024 that Royal Caribbean has ever offered these Oasis class ships, the largest, class of ships with all of the fun amenities that go along with that on these 3 and 4 night sailings. The Dog Nation cruise is a 4-night sailing. And so that's a really fun new horizon here. And we wanted to be a part of that with our Dog Nation cruise for this year. So bigger and better than ever before. All kinds of fun events taking place, specially themed Dog Nation events. Plus, we're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. We're going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. We're having all of the fun you would imagine us having with all of that. So Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. You can reach her directly if you want to. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email Jessica, jslater@dreamvacations.com. But I also want you to go to her website there as well that she's put together specially for our Royal Caribbean cruise. It's royaldogs.com. You want all the latest up-to-the-minute information about the Dog Nation cruise, how you can be a part of it. Royaldogs.com, the place to go for all of that. All right, a couple of cruising around the SEC stories here before we get Jake Fromm. We started our show by saying, or at least near the beginning of the show today, we talked about Georgia's kind of perennial status right now as the number one team in all of these way too early top 25s. We'll have plenty more to discuss about that. And over the course of the next couple of days, we're going to kind of look at some of the issues perhaps standing in Georgia's way as it tries to get back to number one in the country for the 2024 season. But how about the other teams ranked near Georgia in some of these way too early top 25s? One of the teams that you're seeing pretty, consistently featured near the top is Texas. ESPN that I'm looking at right now has Texas as the number 2 team in its way too early top 25. And to me, one of the big takeaways from the college football playoff was Texas making the playoff, getting there, obviously not beating Washington, but playing a good, strong game against the Huskies, only to fall a little bit short there at the end. I think the feeling around Texas coming into the SEC officially for 2024 is far different now than it perhaps would have been a couple of years ago when their inclusion in the SEC was first announced. This is a team that's been mocked for being overrated. The whole idea of Texas is back and that always being kind of a unrequited prediction. Well, I would say now Texas is back. They did, win the Big 12 for the first time since 2009 in their last year of the league. They did make the college football playoff and kind of held up pretty well over the course of the entirety of the season. That this is a big game for any team that plays them next year in the league, including Georgia. I don't know that Texas is going to win the national championship next year or anything like that, but this whole idea of them being impossibly overrated all the time, as of right now, this is one of the really marquee teams and the marquee matchups in the SEC next season, and their placement on some of these way too early top 25 is kind of confirmation of that. Another team you're seeing near the top of all of this, and number 3 in the ESPN way too early top 25, that is Oregon. Oregon, I believe, goes in the Big Ten next year with a chance to be the class of the entire league, more so than defending national champion Michigan, more so than the typical perennial power Ohio State. I think this could be a really big year for Dan Lanning and Oregon. They are just mastering the talent acquisition process here right now. Obviously, in need of a replacement for Bo Nix, of course, whose 10-year college career, however long it's been, comes to an end. But Dan Lanning is doing some very good things at Oregon right now. That is a very big deal. Alabama is number 4 in ESPN's way too early top 25. Clearly this is a revenge spot for Georgia on September 28th, and it is a very big game. Georgia needs to win that. Georgia needs to beat Alabama. We all know how true that is. But part of the offseason story for me is going to be what happens next for Jalen Milroe. This is a guy you've heard me say before I thought Georgia showed too much deference to when it came to the SEC championship, and a guy that I think kind of fell short. You can blame it on Seth McLaughlin and the snaps if you want to, the center exchange, but I didn't think that Milroe was great against Michigan. And Milroe's ability to take the next step as a quarterback going to be a big issue for Alabama here in 2024. And frankly, I'm not quite so sure that Milroe takes that snap. Could be worth paying attention to, or I should say takes that step, I mean to say. A couple other things real quick. National championship game, very high ratings, and it's a confirmation here of, the committee's desire to have college football seem like a balanced sport, level playing field nationally, where all of the conferences are kind of vying in a similar position. There is clearly a financial incentive to do that. Now, the Pac-12 is going away, but America liked having a team from the Pacific Northwest apparently in the championship game, and liked having a Midwestern team in the championship game in a way that most years that would typically be the SEC. So keep this in mind, that we believe that the college football playoff is essentially a business, and it's going to do what is best for business, and excluding the extra SEC team from this year's playoff proved to be good for business. Excluding the Deep South team, Florida State, from this year's playoff and making up whatever reason they wanted to do so, that proved to be good for business. So you can say that competitively the playoff committee folks made the wrong decision, but what you can't say is they don't understand their business. They knew that putting this cross-section of America into their playoff would have the chance to benefit the bottom line overall, and they turned out to be right about that. So as we move into the 12-team playoff era, I think there's going to be less chances to put your thumb on the scale and manipulating the competition, but it doesn't completely end. Who you choose to give a bye to, who you choose to give a home game to, who you force to go on the road, who you exclude from the playoff overall. Those things are all going to matter going forward, and keep your eye on this committee doing what it can to make the sport appear balanced, make the playing field appear level all across the country at large, because pretty clearly there are some financial incentives associated with making everybody in America feel like they've got a shot, and that this is not a sport completely dominated by the teams in the SEC and in the Deep South. And then I'll finally mention this very quickly. Mason Smith, the former five-star defensive lineman, his career at LSU has come to an end, moving on to the NFL. And if you want to sort of speak of what LSU has kind of not been this year, perhaps maybe even some in 2022 as well, a guy like this who came in with such high expectations but battled injury and battled all kinds of whatever and just ended up not really being the player at LSU that he could be. And, when you think about what the new SEC is going to look like and what LSU's place in that's going to be, guys like Mason Smith, when you're good enough as a recruiting power to get the elite defensive lineman, what do you do with them when you get them? That's going to be a really important story. LSU has probably not gotten as much out of its defensive talent here the last couple of years. One of the reasons why they've made a very pricey change at defensive coordinator moving forward. And the Smith era coming to an end there in Baton Rouge without a lot to show for his career, that is clearly one of the things that LSU is going to try to fix going forward. And we'll watch to see if they're able to do that. We'll also make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as promised, we'll have a fun conversation right now with the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take. We welcome in the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, who's a part of a pretty busy news cycle up there in Washington, D.C. right now as he gets ready to wrap up an NFL season and come on back home here. Jake, thanks for your time, and happy 2024. Glad to be talking to you.
Happy 2024 as well. Such a bittersweet moment because college football is done. Sadly, my NFL season is done. To look forward to is the NFL playoffs. So, it sucks that college football has come to an end, but it sure was a good one.
So, Jake, when you look at, what Washington's gone through the last little bit, when you have a situation like this where, head coach loses his job, what's it like being on the inside on that when you're a part of an organization and a franchise that has to go through that? I know it's a harrowing time for the coaches, probably a confusing time for the players. For those of us who see this play out on like ESPN throughout the week, what's it actually like to be a part of this?
Yeah, it's tough. There's just so much uncertainty in the air for players, for coaches, even for staff as well. You just never know what the future holds, but you just kind of have to put faith in the work you've done and the good Lord above that He's going to put you where you need to be and put you in the right spot.
Of course, congratulations to you. You were put on the active roster, I believe, for the final game for the Commanders here this season. I know that had to be a nice feeling, and I guess for a lot of the folks who follow your career and want the best for you, what comes next for you now with all of that? What will the next few months be like for you?
Yeah, and so I was kind of blessed enough to be put on active roster the last two games.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so that's always nice. Great little pay raise as well. But the future for me is, technically I am, still a part and on roster and on contract for next season. But you never know. A new regime could come in and wipe the whole thing clean, or you could hire in house and you're good to go. So you just never know. But you just kind of have to hope that the work you've put in up to this point kind of put you over the hump and put you where you need to be.
I won't ask you to betray any extra information you might have, but once again, this is the type of thing that I think people are curious about. So you have a strong interest in who the next head coach in Washington is and who, perhaps the next play caller will be there as well. Do you have additional information on that's different than the average person, or are you just like everybody else sort of looking at Adam Schefter's tweets to sort of find out how all this goes down? Like how much, I guess, insight into the process do they give such, folks such as yourself on the roster?
Yeah, I wish I was a little bit more in the know and had the scoop on it, and I wish I could tell it, especially here on DawgNation. But man, I'm just as clueless as the next guy. To be honest, the owner did come in and talk to us yesterday morning after they announced Coach Rivera was just said that they're going to hire an executive of football operations and go from there. So we'll kind of see. I think a lot depends on that hire, and that hire will depend on what the head coaching situation will look like.
You mentioned the college football season coming to an end. What were your thoughts on just how it all ended? Michael Penix played amazing against Texas, but probably not able to match that against Michigan. Wolverines win the national title. Not everybody's thrilled about that because of the controversy they've kind of been through. What was your kind of final thoughts about how all of this came to a close?
I thought Michigan did a great job of staying true to themselves. They came in and wanted to win the line of scrimmage. They won the point of attack, and they won in the trenches. Their big guys just played better. And obviously, you saw it on offense and the offensive line, and they were able to run the ball for more. They ran the ball for 303 yards, and all that Washington's offense had total on offense was 301 yards. So that's just tough to overcome. And then Michigan's defensive front did a great job of just getting Michael Penix off his game. He was just a little bit off, a little bit late to this ball or a little bit too early on this one. And, they weren't quite able to complete a deep, explosive pass. And it was just really tough to overcome Michigan's physicality in the game.
Finish with this. Georgia added a quarterback to its roster this week, Jayden Maiava, coming in from UNLV. I'm guessing you have not watched a lot of game film of the Running Rebels here. You've been busy with your own football career going on. But to me, as a quarterback, I think you probably have some understanding of this, that Kirby Smart has said, hey, we want 4 scholarship quarterbacks. We want kind of a full he kind of used the word quote or whatever it is, sort of a full complement of quarterbacks on the roster. But if you're, a guy like Ryan Puglisi or a guy like Gunnar Stockton, while you're always happy to have, good, talented teammates, and you clearly want what's best for Georgia, there's also an individual competition going on here, and bringing in a guy that's got starting experience somewhere else kind of ratchets that up a little bit, right? If you're a quarterback, you perhaps maybe see some of this a little bit different than the coaching staff does of, this is one more person perhaps vying for maybe playing time this year if something happens to Carson Beck, and certainly in an ongoing battle to perhaps be a starter in 2025, definitely the presence of additional quarterbacks sort of spices that up some, doesn't it?
Yeah, you just you never know until they set foot on campus and they throw the ball, the first time where, if you're another guy in the room, you just anytime they bring somebody in that has experience, that's just competition. It's another guy you're going to have to beat out. You're at, the University of Georgia, and it doesn't matter. Like, you're going to have to compete against somebody, and they're going to be good and they're going to be talented. So I think it's always good to fill that room with as much talent as you could possibly have. Obviously, I would assume, that Carson would definitely be the guy going in the 2024. I don't think there's any controversy on that one. But, moving on in the future, after that, you never know. The transfer portal is always alive and well. You never want to get too far ahead of yourself. But, man, anytime they bring another guy in the room, it's just another opportunity to compete.
Jake, it's so great to talk to you as always, and obviously we wish you the best as you kind of move into your off-season phase here, and we hope you get a chance to enjoy a little time off coming up soon, maybe at some point in time to kind of recharge your batteries. I'm sure that's something you probably feel like you need. So thanks for being here as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take, and we'll look forward to the chance to talk to you very soon.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you for having me, man. Appreciate you.
Really good stuff there with the former Georgia quarterback. Of course, that's our Kroger Fresh Take, and my invitation to you is to check out KrogerChefJr.com. That's JUNIOR, KrogerChefJr.com, for the guided kids cooking experience known as Kroger Chef Jr. This month, making some chicken salad. It's just $7 per child, and in addition to being a part of the food preparation process, you also get some really cool things there as well. There's like a chef's hat and a recipe box, a spatula, all kinds of fun things. It's a really great experience for you and your child, and another chance to experience that this month at select Kroger locations. So check out KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. Once again, KrogerChefJr.com. All right, quick shout out here there as well. Georgia basketball tonight against Arkansas. This is probably about as excited as I've been in quite some time for a Georgia basketball game. This is a team that won its first SEC game on the road this past Saturday at Missouri. It's hosting Tennessee this upcoming Saturday. I'm actually going to that game. And tonight, a chance to face what's supposed to be a pretty good Arkansas team, but obviously reeling from a loss to Auburn this past weekend. And a chance to put some more work in on a resume that is starting to get the attention of some like NCAA tournament watchers, things like that. Right now, Georgia kind of in the mix here for the NCAA tournament. So obviously a win against Arkansas tonight would go a long way towards that. So best of luck to the Georgia basketball team as they get ready to play tonight. We're obviously watching that closely here right now on DawgNation Daily. And one more shout out before we wrap up here today. Our friends at the Finish Long Drink, if you're getting ready to watch some basketball tonight or this weekend or whenever else, the Finish Long Drink, a great thing to go with you as you do all of that. Whether it's the traditional in the blue can, grapefruit flavor, gin kick, that's probably still my favorite version, even after all these years. The cranberry, a lot of folks in my neighborhood love that. The long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. Or for a limited time here in the Peach State, get the peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink. I know a lot of you love that, and a lot of you have been working hard to find it because it seems to sell out pretty quick wherever it is. Either way, this great category of beverage known as the ready-to-drink cocktail, the best-tasting beverage in that category is the Finish Long Drink. So go to thelongdrink.com, and you can find out some more about that and where you can pick some up here today. All right, so as we wrap up today, we'll do a golden shoe here. A little bit of conversation on the show about Georgia's the way too early top 25 number one, and obviously the betting odds are out for the upcoming year. Our buddy Ryan Walker sharing this to say it's great that ESPN's already crowned the dogs for next year. And you see the graphic from the ESPN show Get Up, where you look ahead to the national championship odds by ESPN Bet. That's the new betting service the ESPN is partnering with. Georgia just a little bit more than 4-1 to win next year's national title, ahead of Bama at 6-1, Ohio State at 7.5-1, Michigan, the reigning champs, at 9-1, short-lived glory for them perhaps. Texas, we mentioned them earlier, at 9-1, Oregon at 12-1. Yeah, so Georgia right there on the top. The betting favorite, the early, way too early top 25 favorite. A lot of folks, big expectations for Georgia this year. We're excited about that. Lousy, stinking Gators, no such expectations. In fact, it's been 1,159 days since they have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, of course, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. By now, you know that. Now, just to play with some of your minds, I almost changed clothes again so we could do like 5 different wardrobe changes, or at least sort of flipping flop back and forth between various outfits here. So, yeah. A lot of moving parts around here these days, but you know what? It's all in good fun. And after a little bit of pre-record stuff, obviously, as we've well chronicled now, we are now back live in the moment, ready to take your comments. And, of course, there was a little bit of a reference there to the Jayden Maiava thing with Jake Fromm. We decided to leave that in, as I explained a little earlier. I know many of you are joining us in progress, but we decided to leave that in just simply because Jake kind of talking about the bigger picture there of quarterbacks involved and what's going to be a crowded quarterback competition and whether it includes Jayden Maiava or not. Apparently appears that it will not. Clearly that still seems true that Georgia would like to add that fourth quarterback, and for the likes of Ryan Puglisi and Gunnar Stockton, crowded competition to become the heir apparent, the backup, the understudy to Carson Beck. That's going to be a big part of what happens here in 2024. All right, with that said, we're going to dive in here and take your comments. We actually have a busy day around Dog Nation, kind of off the air here, so we probably won't be going incredibly long on this front, but I am happy to be doing with you nonetheless. Eric, let me get Eric up here. Let's get the name here. Eric, is it Triggerstad? Eric, so yeah, Jayden Maiava is not coming to Georgia. This kind of coming late last night. I was already in bed when this went down. Woke up early this morning to find this out. Jayden Maiava is not coming to UGA. Looks like he's going to go to USC, which was where he was originally expected to go. Ulysses Dunnings says not going to USC. I believe he means not coming to Georgia, going to USC. I believe that's what Ulysses means there. And I do believe that's the case. Ken Holcomb says the volume went up when we went live. I hope it wasn't too ear popping there for you. Let us see what else. Neil says the gray shirt means that I'm live. Yeah, there you go. There you go, Neil. That's about right. That's about right. See, now, like, what I could do is, people on TV do this kind of thing where it's like, they're always like, changing clothes and trying to match up and things like that. I obviously could do that. But if I try to bring 16 changes of clothes, because we're going to do some shows coming up in the next few days, getting ready for a fun cruise vacation that I have coming up. Y'all, please don't make me change clothes every time we do a new show, because it just gets to be tiresome. And that's also just one more thing for me to lose and leave somewhere. I told you this on Fridays during the fall. I got to where I was just sort of wearing my high school football clothes to the show, because that was just like one more thing I didn't have to worry about forgetting. For sure. For sure. Ken Holcomb, yes, that is what we're doing. So we are pre-recording. See, I'll give you more information you want to know. So, like, the system that we use to stream the show is essentially broken. I don't know why. It's very expensive, but it's just broken. And so when we were having those crashes, we were crashing because of that. And so we are pre-recording, still using the same system to pre-record, but it's one of those things where if it were to crash, and thankfully thus far during our pre-recordings it has not, we're also pre-recording in sort of like short bursts. So if it does crash, we can kind of deal with it. But we're pre-recording it so that if it crashes, we can just sort of go back and do it again if we needed to. Because if we crash while we're live on the air, the stream breaks. It'd be one thing if we just went off the air for a minute or two. That wouldn't necessarily be that big of a deal. But the stream breaks. It essentially causes the show to go off the air. And obviously we can't have that. So that's why we're doing this. Now, also today, we're in the midst of moving to a brand new studio. I have no idea what that's going to be like, but we're going to find out more about that here coming up today. So eventually we are on the way to what we believe is going to be a permanent and better solution. And listen, I'm going to tell you right now, I am very, very thankful for all the people behind the scenes who've helped us here today. We have 4 people working the show today. This is like SportsCenter. We got Jay and Cody and Kaylee and Michael. We got so many people who are here helping out today. So incredibly grateful for all the helping hands we have here. And everybody's wish, obviously, we have a nice, permanent, seamless solution. Like, I can't do this show. Like, I'm waking up at like 5 in the morning right now, which I don't necessarily mind waking up early. But the whole rhythm of the show is different when you record it so early. So no one is ready to get it sort of back to normal more so than me, but we're probably a few days away from that. Barry Watkins bringing up the Kirby to the Falcons rumor. Yeah, that's not real. It's not. Now, I said this to our 1st and 15 audience a little earlier. I'm a little different than some of you in that I do think at some point in time over the next, say, 15 years, at some point, I believe that Kirby might consider an NFL job. I think that's a tough thing for never to say never about. I think there's some chance that maybe one day that might be a consideration. I don't believe that day is today, nor do I believe it is in the next few years. And 2 things are telling to me. Thing number 1 is how many non-Georgia fans are wishful that this would occur. That gives you an idea of what they sort of feel like their fate is going to be in the next few years with Kirby still at Georgia and still in college football. And on the flip side of that, this to me is also really telling. And I mentioned this to our 1st and 15 audience. I'll repeat myself here now. There are presumably a good number of Georgia fans who are also Falcons fans. There is perhaps a line of reasoning out there that you might say, well, I want Kirby to go to the Falcons, and I want him to do for them what he did for my favorite college team. But you almost don't hear that anywhere. That is a dog that is definitely not barking, no pun intended. And if I'm a Falcon organization person, if I'm part of the Falcons brass, boy, that'd be really concerning for me. Is that Georgia fans unanimous in their belief that the best place for Kirby is to stay at Georgia and continue having success there, as opposed to going to Atlanta and giving them some of the same success he's brought here to UGA. It's not going to happen either way, but the fact that Georgia fans, there isn't a pocket of Georgia fans who would be somewhat hopeful for it to happen. If I'm the Falcons, that gives me an idea of where my pecking order is in the state right now. You can't help but notice that. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins said he had 3 gumps this morning approach him about Kirby to the Falcons. I mean, that tells you, man. That tells you for sure. I also wonder if Kirby ever took an NFL job, if he'd even want the Falcons job. Perhaps he might rather have something else. Let's go to YouTube now for a minute. Aaron Dixon says the Falcons should hire the Raiders interim coach. I wouldn't mind seeing Todd Monken get involved for that Falcons job. Jonathan Aaron says, isn't this going to be like your 6th or 7th new building? Jimbo's money must have been very good to you. Yeah, we've moved studios a lot. It's crazy. So pre-video, we were in a radio production studio for a while. Then we took the show to my house. A lot of people think that the show started in the closet in my house. Weirdly enough, that was actually our 2nd studio. And then we kind of moved into a very simple makeshift studio that wasn't much more than an expanded closet and you know, the office building we were located in the time. Then after that, our 4th studio became our first real studio. And this would have been like fall of 2017. We moved into what I think of as sort of real studio. Now, that didn't last hardly very long at all. And I loved that spot, but it didn't last very long at all. And then we moved to another studio, and I really liked this studio. But this was, you know, around the time because that pandemic and all that crazy stuff occurred. Then we left that studio. Then we came here. And so that had been Studio 6, right? And so this will be our 7th studio. It's crazy to think in just under 10 years of history, we've had 7 different studios. And I sort of get the impression that this one's going to be sort of a short-term deal too. Foster Moss said, the famous background of my home with the clock that's only right twice a day. Well, listen, if the clock's right twice a day, it's still double my typical output, I would say. Let's see what else. So Chris Pearson says, who's the next possible prospect for WB? Am I dumb? What does WB stand for? Am I dumb? Probably so. What does that stand for? Let's see what else. DMAR42 says, I've said a million times, nothing's going to change until Rich McKay is removed from the office. Yeah, I mean, I would say that broadly speaking, I'm not anti-Rich McKay. He seems like a pretty good dude. But I do believe the mistake the Falcons organization makes is that because McKay is held in high regard in league circles, you know, there's a lot of like, oh, this is, you know, if you watch that press conference the other day, I realize it's not a Falcon show, so we're not going to belabor this point. But, you know, it's like Arthur Blank's going on and on about our hiring process the last time was viewed as the envy of the league. Like the Falcons view themselves as a model organization, which given the fact that they fired like 6 coaches in the Blank tenure is laughable. And the fact that, you know, Rich McKay is like well thought of within league circles. Oh my gosh, it makes me want to vomit. They think because they're in the insiders club, they're in the sort of country club, they think that somehow makes them accomplished. You know, that they clearly have the sort of elite status that's born out of having billionaire friends. But in most cases, they haven't really done very much to earn that, I would say. And I certainly get the impression that Arthur Blank is quite popular with other NFL owners. But of course he would be. He represents an easy out. I mean, Blank's not a drunk like so-and-so owner might be. And he's not, you know, in trouble with the law the way that so-and-so owner would have been. I mean, he doesn't embarrass the league, so they like him because of that. And he's fairly easy to get over on. So from that standpoint, of course, he's going to be popular with the other owners in the league. And of course, you know, they're going to laud him as a model organization for how he goes about doing his business because none of his business takes any food off their table. Of course, that's the case. And I thought the press conference from the Falcons the other day was embarrassing. I don't know what you're supposed to say when you're back at the drawing board again, sort of starting at square one again, but it's not that. It's not. You've got to show a little bit more humility and contrition for the repeated failure of your organization and the idea that it's not even a question about whether or not that Rich McKay should be re-racked to go do this all again. If you are a Falcons fan, and frankly, there are fewer of you than there used to be, but if you are a Falcons fan, you have every right to be bothered by that, I believe. Jonathan Aaron says, what one group do you think will be our best next year, and which group do you think will make the leaps to be better? Best group for Georgia next year? Well, that's a good question. I mean, is it too easy to say inside linebacker? Because I do like that group a lot, and I do believe, with all due respect, Jamon Dumas Johnson's decision to leave gives you an idea how deep that Georgia can be at the inside linebacker spot. I mean, for me right now, there's a lot of very good, and this is actually probably a topic at some point in time, but there's a lot of very good, and there's work to be done to figure out how you take that next step towards being great. In other words, we expect Ra Thomas and Dominic Love to be coming back. You look at, what Georgia also has, the receiver position. I think you think the receivers can be pretty good, but there's a next step need to be taken. Offensive line feels like the pieces are in place for a pretty good group, but you lose Amarius Mims, you lose Cedric Von Granger. While on paper it looks good, there are steps that need to be taken for that group to also be great. You can say the same thing about defensive line. Good to get Nazir Stackhouse back. You hope to get Warren Brinson back. The emergence of Jordan Hall and Christian Miller and perhaps Jamal Jarrett, all of that's really hopeful, but you got to take that next step. Defensive secondary. I think that group could be really, really good, but it's no easy feat to say, replace Javon Bullard, replace Kamari Last. Those are no easy feats necessarily. So I think that you're touching on a pretty interesting question. And I don't see a position group for Georgia that is even, reasonably likely to be a weakness. That's why Georgia's right now considered the very early preseason number one. But I would say, with the exception probably of quarterback, where you're only playing the one guy, I would say every position group probably has some work to be done to truly be great. It's a pretty fascinating topic. RKD says that Rich McKay is the definition of the glorified pencil pusher who found a way to be in charge. Yeah. I mean, it's like the old George Carlin line of like, there's a club and you're not in it. Those of us who are sports fans, for the most part, we sort of feel that there's pretty clearly this sort of elite club. And once you're in the elite club, it's really hard to be kicked out of the elite club, and I'm not going to cite examples outside of the world of sports, but there are those in great supply of when you're kind of in that elite club, in that sort of like, country club style environment, you just can't get kicked out. And Rich McKay has been in it. McKay has been rumored to be, one of these days, at this point in time, perhaps that ship has sailed, but he's going to go work for the league. This is the Falcons always have a lot of employees who are on the committees, the competition committee and all these, these are league lifers. These are guys who are, in the league circles. I'm not really quite so sure what the Falcons fans are getting out of those relationships the Falcons brass have with other, people around the NFL. There's pretty clearly sort of a country club environment within the, top, level of NFL leadership. A lot of the Falcons, folks are sort of well received in that community, but they are not doing very much to make their team successful. Andrew Hughes says, so they're going to give you a soundboard in the new studio with that cool DJ and the horn. I would like to have that. Indeed. I would really enjoy that. Andrew, that's very funny. Very funny. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Frank says that reports are that South Carolina is going to hire James Coley as offensive coordinator. So I believe that South Carolina has hired James Coley, but not as offensive coordinator. Dow Loggins is still going to be South Carolina offensive coordinator. James Coley is just going to be on staff. And listen, as long as he's nowhere near the play sheet, I don't mind having James Coley on a staff. James Coley's a good recruiter. People seem to like him. Pretty good dude. Probably just a horrendous. I'm talking about scandalously bad offensive coordinator. So as long as he's nowhere near your play sheet, you're probably okay, and that's probably a pretty good hire. If Coley came back here as a position coach, I'd probably be okay with that. He's not going to do that probably, but I'd be okay with him as a position coach. You don't hate that. You just can't have him as offensive coordinator. And Dowell Loggins is still the OC at South Carolina. TDT says, it's my birthday today, and I want to say thank you for DawgNation giving me a gift every weekday all year long. TDT, that's an amazing thing. Incredibly kind. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for sharing your birthday with us and also sharing those nice words. You have no idea what that means to me. Y'all, we ride a roller coaster of ups and downs here in terms of, just delivering this content on a daily basis. And to know that so many of you are so kind to sort of connect with us every day. If I ever take it for granted, may that be my last day on this earth, because it is just such a valuable thing. I just really appreciate that. I appreciate that. K-Dog wants me to get those turntables. Listen. So 2 years ago for Christmas, Santa Claus brought my daughter one of those like turntable things. She wanted to get. She was only 8, so she's 8 now. She'd been 7 back then. So we got one of those things. I never could quite figure out how to use that too well, but pretty fun stuff. I do think I would be a good DJ, though. I think I'd be good at doing like the mashup stuff where you like mix the old songs together. I think I'd be good at that. I think if I could do so. Let's see what else. Brooksy says, why doesn't a producer snag the comments and read them to me? The honest truth is I actually like looking for the comments myself. I do. And this is one of those things I feel like that over the course of time, I've kind of learned to do pretty well. Because some of y'all post some crazy stuff. And I feel like I've gotten pretty good at sort of self-editing this on the fly. So I feel like I've gotten pretty good at doing that. I enjoy the reading of the comments part. BMAC says, way back when, the Falcons should have elevated Kyle Shanahan as head coach. Also giving Julio and Matt all that money after their playoff run was absolutely the wrong move. Belichick would have moved on after that year if people were not satisfied with their pay. BMAC, I think you're really right about that on a number of fronts. Kyle Shanahan's pretty clearly one of the best coaches in the NFL. Falcons had him as offensive coordinator. Now it's the most Falcon thing ever that a brilliant coach like this did the dumbest thing ever while being a Falcons coach and choosing not to run the ball near the end of the Super Bowl will kind of live on in infamy. But that aside, Shanahan's a brilliant coach. Completely made the Dan Quinn era seem like it was something that it wasn't. There was reason to think for a while that maybe Quinn himself was a good coach because of how successful the Falcons were. But looking back on that, obviously that was just the Kyle Shanahan offense. And so, you had that going on. And then you had the Packers coach as one of the assistants too at the same time, right? So 2 coaches who are pretty clearly a much higher level than what anything Atlanta has had, since then. And you didn't have the wherewithal to kind of hold on to them. In the case of Kyle Shanahan, they should have just made him head coach. You're absolutely right about that. K-Dog says, my son's a well-known DJ in Atlanta. That's really cool. It's amazing how much money the DJs make these days. Amazing. Amazing. DT says he compliments my ability to read comments on the fly. I've wondered how you do it. We can't all be trusted. Yeah, some of y'all can't be. So this is one of those things where when this technology first started years ago, I don't like to pat myself on the back, but we were really one of the trailblazers in the kind of streaming video college football talk type deal. I wanted it to be interactive. And one of the things I wanted to do was understand that, hey, if you're going to be interactive, we don't do a ton of like regular comments during the regular show because to the podcast audience, that's a little bit intrusive to their ears because there's a little bit of a break in the action while I'm looking for the comment. But I also did not want it to be one of those things where I'm like, too much because, you wanted to have a flow to it. And this is back when we only had the Facebook comment section. Then we've added, several comment sections, since then. But this is one of those things where I kind of said, hey, if I want to have this as a part of the show, I've got to be pretty good at reading on the fly. And I've kind of gotten a little bit better at that. K-Dog says that Monken should stay far away from the Falcons. Maybe so, but, I mean, I'm sure Monken would love to be a head coach. This is one of the jobs that's open. And while every NFL team would love to say, we want our next coach to win a Super Bowl, the truth is you can't have very little control over that, and you can't really predict who's going to be what on the hiring process. But a much more reasonable goal that I do believe that you could make a strong consideration with the hire that you make is, and I don't realize this is a lot of Falcons talk, but the Falcons have 3 skill position players drafted very high in the first round of the draft. Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson. And they didn't get anything out of those guys for what really all 3 of them together this year and the 2 other guys last year. They haven't gotten anything for the most part out of these high draft capital players, skill position players they have. And so while you can't control how successful your team ends up being, you can draft the style of coach that you want. And I know Arthur Smith was an offensive coordinator too, but I believe that the right hire for Atlanta to make would be another offensive-minded coach to sort of find out all these draft picks we, invested in these skill position players. Do we waste all of these? If I was Atlanta, that's what I'd be looking to do. By the way, Kaylee Mansell wants to know who K-Dog's DJ son is. Now, you could say any other than like Sir Foster, who's at the Sanford Stadium. I don't know any DJ's name, but Kaylee, who is young and hip and cool, and she's out at the club, all throughout the week. She wants to know who the DJ son is. Jay Shipes says I'm really good at proofreading his comments while reading other comments. Well, here's the other thing. Like, there are also some names. Like, if I see Jay Shipes' name, I know it's trouble, so I'm already kind of on guard. But here's the other thing I'm really good at. And I totally get this. I'm not in any way being judgmental here. Some people are typing on the fly, and, autocorrect gets you. It's sort of hard for your fingers to move as fast as your mind is thinking. The other thing I'm pretty good at, while we're, patting me on the back here for a moment, the other thing I'm pretty good at is, in addition to filtering out some of the nonsense that I cannot read, some of y'all get political. And this is where you get me in trouble, is when y'all start getting political, because people are just waiting to hear some politics and they're going to just jump up and down and be mad. So I'm always filtering out your politics. Some of y'all, I also run sort of a family-friendly shop around here, so we're careful about that kind of thing. But I also think I'm pretty good at when people kind of type on the fly and they sort of write one thing, they mean another. I'm usually pretty good at editing that. G. Gray says that Kyle Pitts is a stud. He's on a bad team. So, G. Grace, my point is with the Falcons hire, and I don't know if you're a Falcons fan or not, like most Bama fans, you're probably a Cowboys fan, but or a Lakers fan. But I'm kidding, G. But I mean, if Pitts is a stud, clearly in college he was. But if he is a stud, let's find out. Let's bring in a coach who can use him. I would say that anyway. Let's see what else. Jimbo Sliced Bread says, this is where I come to avoid politics. See, that's my point, is that most of you feel that way. And there's always a few people who are trying to, like, sort of put something in there. You don't think I don't notice. Taylor Russell, glad to have you here. Jonathan Aaron says he's calling a shot. Harbaugh to the NFL with Connor Stallions as sideline helper. That's funny. Taylor Russell says, what happened to Stockton's replacement? Well, first of all, Gunnar Stockton was never going anywhere, first of all. But yeah, Jayden Maiava, as we talked about to begin the show, the Maiava era has come to an end. Here at UGA. We all have fond memories for sure. Cassie Turner says, I just like football and like talking about it. Cassie, me too. And I'm glad you're here to do that with us. Stick D says, please vote Brandon Adams for the Georgia Senate in 2024. Now, that politics will allow. Maybe one of these days I'll be here asking for your vote. Who knows? Paul Moon says Harbaugh is a really, really, really weird guy, but he'd be an upgrade for sure. Yeah, so here's the thing. NFL coaches can be pretty weird. In fact, without getting into too many names here, like I've known some people who work for a different franchise, not Atlanta, and they'll tell you that a pretty famous NFL coach they thought was incredibly weird, like shockingly weird, like antisocial weird. But in the NFL, the job is mostly just coaching. You're not doing a lot of public appearances. You're not doing any recruiting. That you can be very, very, very weird to the point that people are like looking around about how weird this guy is. You can be very, very weird and survive in a place like the NFL. College, there's a certain requirement. You got to be a little senatorial. You got to be a little bit, presidential. You got to sort of look good in pictures. You got to, smile well for the camera. You got to speak well. In the NFL, I don't know that you need that. The example we've cited many times is, and I don't think he's a weird guy, but Todd Monken's not the friendliest dude in the world. I mean, some of the interviews we did with Todd Monken, like in LA, we had to edit half that stuff out. I mean, he's just person and this and that and the other, which is his prerogative. That's fine. We just sort of run, as I said before, kind of a family-friendly shop around here. But the point is, like, that's a salty dude. A little salty to be a college head coach, where there's a certain expectation that you're going to be, a little more family friendly. But in the NFL, nobody cares about that. You can be whatever you want to be. Aaron Dixon says Dan Mullen weird. So Mullen was kind of weird, but the example that I'm citing here was like weird, like strange, bizarre. Mullen's just kind of quirky, a little dorky maybe. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says there's no way in hell the Falcons would give Harbaugh a call. Just no way, because it makes too much sense. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we said this yesterday. So if you watch the Falcons press conference the other day, and look, y'all know I like coaching searches, so we're probably talking too much Falcons right now. And part of that's because I don't really care that much about the Falcons. I just like coaching searches. I think coaching searches are fascinating. But if you watch the Falcons press conference the other day, the bizarre part of that press conference was the whole issue about the GM, his name is Terry Fontenot, about him being there, not being there. And people in the media made a big deal about that. But ultimately, the real issue there is the Falcons didn't want Fontenot being on that podium, I believe, this is my opinion, because they didn't want the perception that Fontenot is hiring the next coach, because that means to the next coach, well, if Fontenot is a part of hiring me, that means this guy's my boss. And that is not what the Falcons want. So this is where you get into the Jim Harbaugh thing. We've talked about this now a couple of times. Harbaugh, for the NFL job that he seeks, he wants a substantial level of control in that organization. He wants great say in the draft picks and the roster. And at a place like Atlanta, how much of that can you get? Because Terry Fontenot appears that he's going to be employed, I guess. But you've also got Rich McKay, a layer between you and ownership that's kind of clearly your boss. The next Falcons coach will report to Rich McKay. Would a guy like Jim Harbaugh want that? Now, if you're a Falcons fan, do you want Jim Harbaugh? That's a fair question. But, for these really power-hungry coaches, and a lot of these upwardly mobile guys are just going to be very power-hungry. That's how they're wired, how they're motivated. Coming to a place like Atlanta where you've got a layer of leadership over your head between you and the owner, that's not for everybody. Let us see what else. Let me go back over to the other comment sections for a minute. Then we're going to wrap up here. Let us see. Zach Adams checking out. Zach, we're glad you're here. Somebody was mentioning the Alabama DC job. We haven't heard any new rumors on that, have we? At least I haven't. Gary Holt going into work. Gary, glad you're here. Says that he's been have some power issues. I'm sorry about that. Weather's about to be really bad, y'all, for the next little bit. Is that true? Alan Vrabonchik said 100-plus mile-an-hour gusts. I mean, I knew it was really windy because I saw a bunch of stuff knocked over this morning. And it's going to be like crazy cold next week, I think. Rick Martin shouting at the basketball team. Rick, we mentioned this during the regular show a moment ago. I am like mega into this game tonight. I have not been into a college basketball game in years. I am so here. Now, the game starts at 9, so this may all be a bunch of talk, and I don't actually make it to the final conclusion. Given the fact that we're waking up very early right now, I probably won't. But It's a 9 p.m. tip tonight for Georgia and Arkansas. Eric Musselman's Charges come in desperate need of a win. Georgia riding a win streak, including their first SEC game on Saturday against Missouri. Tennessee comes in this upcoming Saturday. I am big into this game. If Georgia beats Arkansas tonight, and certainly if they were to beat Tennessee on Saturday, but perhaps even with this win tonight, you're talking about a team that's going to probably be included in some of these Joe Lunardi bracketology type things. You're going to probably see Georgia included in some of that if they were able to get that win here tonight. So we'll see. Susan Kornblut said that there were some tornadoes yesterday near Myrtle Beach. So scary times, folks. Be safe out there. Be safe. Let's see what else. All right. Let me go back to DawgNation.com and we'll wrap it up for today. Richard D says, just think, if Harbaugh had more control over Michigan, he would have never allowed scallions, he calls them, to orchestrate such an elaborate sign-stealing machine. Yeah, very interesting. And the other part about the, which is very funny, Richard, the other part about the Harbaugh-Michigan thing, too, is that some of the bad blood there is just sort of old-school money squabbling, that Michigan made Harbaugh take a pay cut during the pandemic because Michigan was all in on that, and Harbaugh, I don't believe, ever forgave them. And so some of the weirdness around Jim Harbaugh and like Michigan and some of that kind of stuff and the constant flirtation with the NFL, I just think it's sort of the basic deal of he's just still really mad about being asked to take a pay cut. Let's see what else. Morris Rich says that he thinks it's funny that I root out all the politics because this is the one reason why he likes the show. No politics. Yeah. It's just the way that we've chosen to do things here. Now, in my private life, I am, to be frank, very into politics. And I think that political things are important. I do. But I also have a job to do here that is on a different universe than all of that. So that is the way that it goes. PDT says, speaking of weird football coaches like Jerry Glanville always leaving tickets for Elvis. First of all, it's amazing how popular Glanville was when he was Falcons coach. Truly amazing. I was a very young guy back then, but Glanville, as weird as he was, people loved him here, man. They loved him. Loved him. All right, anything else before we go? Let's see what else. Monkster says, what do you think about the final coaches poll? I don't guess I've seen the full thing. I need to look at that. We may do a final look at these polls tomorrow. I need to do that. Roger Hall on the subject of the Falcons outreach to UGA fans. Clearly more draft picks would have probably helped with that. But just, anything to sort of show, the Falcons' original color scheme, Rankin Smith was a, UGA alumnus and booster, donor. The original Falcons color scheme was an homage to Georgia. And so, at the very founding of this team, there was a connection with UGA because of the Smith family. But it seems like now, that's, something that never comes up at all. And, I think Atlanta ought to do more to reach out to Georgia fans. If you are a football team in the state of Georgia and you've got a bunch of football fans in Georgia who clearly show a willingness and desire to spend a bunch of money, travel to games, and kind of buy into their team, why you wouldn't do more to tap into that is crazy. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think the Falcons should be DawgNation's biggest advertiser. I mean, if you really wanted to tap into hundreds of thousands of Georgia fans who are football diehards, why you wouldn't do that, I'll never know. Now I don't know. That's not a sales pitch. I'm just saying that's what they would do. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. We're going to get ready to wrap it up for today. I appreciate you being here. Y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online. Philip Jordan Wells pointing out, I believe he's talking about Uncle Junior from The Sopranos. Connor Riley told me this morning that today was the anniversary of the debut of The Sopranos, one of my all-time favorite shows. One of my all-time favorite shows. He's talking about Feach for Falcons coach. Philip Jordan Wells always has a lot of very interesting pop cultural references in here. Very funny. I first studied some about Uncle Junior, played by the great Dominic Nacy, but he was talking about Feach Lamanna, who was played by. Why am I blanking on that? Either way, terrific, all-time great. Good stuff there from Philip Jordan Wells on that. All right, we got to go for now. Y'all have a great day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. As I said before, it's about to be cold. Next week, it's going to be crazy cold. And so go ahead and get ready to get your heating system tuned up so you'll be ready for all of that. rsandrews.com for more on that. Find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, and it may only cost you $99. So find that out there. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll talk to you.